introduce myself. My name is Tracy Atwell. I work with the Canadian Wildlife Federation as a restoration ecologist. And today we're going to have a special presentation on the Hydro Ottawa Pollinator Meadow project. So just some housekeeping for Zoom, so for those people who are familiar or not. Any questions you have, please put in the Q&A box, and then we'll address those at the end. Any technical problems, such as not seeing presentation or audio problems, put that in the chat and we will try and solve your problem with you. And you might also want to check your audio settings to make sure you can hear everything through your speakers or your headphones, whichever one you have set up. Okay. And I just wanted to remind everyone this coming Sunday is the National Truth and Reconciliation Day. I just would ask everyone to consider how they want to honor that day, what their personal thing might be that they want to do to honor that day. So just going to do a bit of a brief overview of rights of way. So for people who may not be familiar, this is one of the projects that CWF is working on, looking at rights of way that can provide habitat for pollinators. So these might be roadsides, these might be power utilities, this could be solar facilities, anywhere where the land is actively managed as it is, where they don't want to have a lot of trees and shrubs and it's controlled over time, vegetation has to be controlled. It's a perfect place for forbs and grasses to support pollinators. And just some of the ecological services these places can support. We talked about it being good habitat. So that also allows the pollination services to come back between the honeybee and the native pollinators. The sites can help with flood attenuation. They can help with snow control, roadway runoff, help with carbon sequestering because these are perennial plants. And it can also reduce the cost of maintenance in some of these sites. So these are all really good benefits of these type of habitats. And then speaking more specifically about these meadows, we know that these sites will provide pollen and nectar for the whole range of seasons from May all the way through till August and September, different plants running up into different seasons. And they are also providing plants for generalist and specialist species. So some pollinators will use all kinds of different plants. Some are specialists just on one or two plants. So providing that variety is really important. And also reproduction or breeding. So a lot of these species will lay eggs, both in the soil and in dead stalks of plants. So that helps them complete their life cycle. Obviously, it also provides a place for them to hide from predators, from wind, from rain. Some species will overwinter in our part of the world, and then other species are migrating. So like the monarch, which will travel through, do the breeding through the summer season, and then return to Mexico. So we're providing all of those benefits together. So now I'm going to stop this share. I'm going to introduce Brandon to you all, and then we'll see his presentation. So Brandon Holden worked previously in urban waterway restoration. Brandon's career since graduating from Fleming College's Ecosystem Management Technician and Technology programs has been focused on the relationship between urban and naturalized landscape. Currently in the role of Lake and Shoreline Stewardship Program Coordinator, acting with Rideau Valley Conservation Authority, Brandon provides guidance on naturalizing urban and developed spaces with a special focus on reducing shoreline erosion. So I am going to pull up Brandon's slides. In the meantime, in the chat, if you want to throw in where you're coming from today, I'd love to hear where everyone is. Okay. Brandon, can you see your slides?
I can see part of them.
Okay. I need to That better?
Yeah,
Okay, great. Okay, take it away, Brandon.
perfect. Well, thanks for the introduction, Tracy. And apologies again for the technical hurdles here. As mentioned, my name is Brandon. I work for the Rideau Valley Conservation Authority, currently in the Shoreline Naturalization Program. And that program is kind of geared towards assisting landowners to renaturalize shoreline and help with any of the issues they have with development properties. But in addition to that, the program kind of helps out in a bunch of other ways, and I think that's part of how we were also involved in this project. So Tracy, we can just go to the next slide there. Yeah, and so I understand that there are probably some people joining who are outside of the province. And so I wanted to give a bit of a background information on conservation authorities in general, if you are unfamiliar. And so just briefly, we're organizations that provide programs and services that are designed to further conservation, restoration, development, and the management of natural resources. And so RVCA works within the Rideau Valley watershed to carry out monitoring and reporting on watershed health, provide planning and regulatory advice on development in floodplain and other natural hazard areas. And RVCA specifically is pretty lucky to be able to provide some really great stewardship, restoration, and educational programs, including a substantial forestry program where we plant over 200,000 trees a year, the shoreline naturalization program that I mentioned, as well as numerous day camps and education programs throughout a few of our conservation areas. So yeah, you can go to the next slide. Perfect. And so I'll have to kind of start by apologizing. I wasn't at the Conservation Authority when the project was started, so working with a bit of secondhand information here. So Tracy, if I say anything incorrect or you want to provide some additional context, feel free to jump in at any time. But looking at this project in particular, it really was an instance of a lot of goals and needs for many different groups sort of came together at the same time that made it happen. And so for background on the site, because of increased development and power needs in the Barrhaven area, which is an area kind of south, a little bit south west of downtown Ottawa, there was a need for a new transformer station. And so to that end, there was a 10-hectare parcel of farmland adjacent to some other city-owned property that you can see up on the slide right now. That was selected for the new power station. And RVCA was brought in to assist with some compensation through planting trees on the unused portions of the site. However, because of increased frequency of storms and severity as well, and I think at the time, the 2018 tornado was probably something that weighed heavily on a lot of people's minds. There was a desire to explore some lower growing alternative options to fill the spacing.
Brandon, just to interrupt there for a second. Yeah. If you could just speak a little louder, we're just having a bit of trouble hearing your audio.
Sorry about that. Is it a little better now or still an issue?
I think that's a bit, if you could just be loud, that would be great.
Yeah, sure. I'm not exactly sure where the speaker is here, so. Okay, yeah, so as I was saying, 10-hectare area of land that was selected for the site. And there was a desire to explore some lower growing alternative options to cover the area as opposed to trees. And so during this period, there was also a City of Ottawa directive to work with rights-of-way landowners to enhance pollinator habitat, with CWF working on similar initiatives. And so there seemed to be a really great opportunity with this space in particular, where the goals of a lot of different parties were aligned. And so in the end, there was a bit of a mixed approach that was agreed on. 2 hectares of the area were taken up with the power station. The remaining 8 hectares of field were agreed to be turned into a mix of roughly 6 hectares of pollinator meadow, and then another a little over a hectare with trees planted along the borders. And so as you can see from the partner list, it did take the expertise of many different groups working together to bring this project together in the end. And we can go to the next slide. Great. And so despite there being many partners, there were still a lot of challenges and mistakes made throughout the process. Getting started, once we had the design and everyone was happy with what the plan was, the first hurdle we ran into was site preparation. And so the field was originally disked back in 2019 with the idea that by spring of 2020, we could hand seed it with volunteers. Unfortunately, that didn't quite work out. And although the field was disked multiple times, we still had some dense layers of corn stalks that were remaining. And so in addition to that, we also ran into COVID, which further slowed efforts. And so what ended up happening instead was that the site was planted with soybeans in 2020 with the hope of improving site conditions and then also allowing for extra time to enlist aid of additional experts. And so we did end up connecting with a group from Southern Ontario, the Rural Land and Stewardship Network. And with them, we were able to add some additional specialized equipment as well as their expertise to help the project move along. And so aside from the pollinator meadow, the planned tree planting department did go ahead as scheduled. And in the spring of 2020, 2,700 potted trees were installed along the borders. And species for those trees included white pine, white spruce, red and bur oak, as well as sugar and red maple. And I think we can go to the next slide. Perfect. And so yeah, now moving into spring 2021, soybeans were a success, and so now the site was ready to finally be seeded. Unfortunately, another issue, the seeders that we originally had were not suited to native seed. And we quickly found out that because of the size of the area, trying to evenly distribute that seed by hand wasn't a realistic thing. And so fortunately, again, through connections with other groups, we were able to source a Truex native seed drill, and the meadow was seeded in late May of 2021. And we can go to the next slide. And so speaking of the seed mix, we had a custom blend for this project of native grasses and wildflowers, and the composition was roughly 70% grasses and 30% wildflowers. Indian grass, Virginia wild rye, and big blue stem were the more prevalent grasses in the mix. And as far as wildflowers go, the more common species included were tall coreopsis, false sunflower, pale purple coneflower, and black-eyed Susan. Next slide. Great. And so I guess adding to the additional mistakes, or maybe it was just misfortune, the delay in seeding the meadow wasn't the last challenge for the project. Once the seed was laid, we did unfortunately experience an extended period of dry weather that spring. And we also missed the timing window for applying some herbicide to noxious plants that were starting to creep their way into the meadow. But throughout this time, we were also happy to add 100 wildflower plugs, which were donated by CWF. But from there, we just had to wait and hope for the best. And next slide. Yeah, so throughout the next couple of months that summer, the site did see a lot of growth, unfortunately, mostly non-target and weedy species. And next slide. So now that the seed was laid and that we started to see plants coming into the field, we moved into our planned maintenance and monitoring activities for the project. And so as far as maintenance goes, especially in the early years, the goal was to prevent a lot of the non-target species from establishing in the meadow. And so to this end, we would regularly mow the site, just try and keep the weeds from going to seed, and to try and keep out some of the early successional woody species like Manitoba maple and prevent them from gaining a foothold in the meadow. And so in addition to the mowing, we also conducted spot spraying to address the hazard plants that I previously mentioned, and specifically we were looking to control parsnip. Beyond the maintenance, we also had some monitoring activities planned, And so there were 3 visits throughout the summer to the site, and we were using randomly placed meter squared box plots to assess the types of vegetation that were coming up. So we would randomly distribute the plots throughout the site and then identify all the plants within that box, just to get a sense of what species we're establishing and to be able to track the change over time and to gauge our success with the planting. And so in addition to those box plots, we were also making notes on general site condition as well as any wildlife sightings within the meadow. Next slide. And so here we have some initial results and a bit of a mixed success in the first year. The site did change quite substantially over the 3 or so months of surveys. And I think the notable things to look at from the table here would be just the increase in the presence of native plants as the summer progressed, as well as the presence of a few of our target species. And that being said, though, we did see kind of mostly still weedy species throughout the meadow at this time. Next slide. Yeah, so moving into the middle years of the project, 2022 and 2023, there was a small expansion to the planted area of the meadow. Previously, the space identified by that yellow circle was used during the construction. So now that that was freed up, we seeded that area as well. And then the other thing we did was some refill planting for the treat areas, just to address some pockets of die-off. And of course, regular monitoring and maintenance activities continued. Throughout this time, parsnip was a particular challenge. It's growing kind of all along the borders surrounding the field, and providing a ready seed source that keeps getting blown into our meadow. And we can go to the next slide. Now looking at 2022, we did see some positive changes from the previous year. There's a marked decrease in the amount of exposed ground, as well as an increase in the number of target plants present within the meadow. We're also seeing larger and larger patches of some of our target species, specifically black-eyed Susans and goldenrods. Unfortunately, results from 2023 are still being analyzed, but kind of just observation of what we've seen is that we're seeing lots of larger patches of our target species and smaller patches of the weedy non-targets. We're also seeing some improvement on the parsnip front, and so while it's still readily abundant along the borders of the field, now that the field is a bit more densely populated with grasses and wildflowers, I think that's inhibiting kind of seed being blown in a lot, and currently the parsnip is almost entirely absent from a lot of those interior areas of the meadow. So next slide. Yeah, so as I mentioned, beyond the specific monitoring protocols, we were also making some more general observations of the site, of site conditions, and also keeping records of any wildlife that we come across. So staff have reported lots of pollinator species, including many varieties of bees and butterflies, including monarchs, which is nice to see. We've also come across a variety of other wildlife, lots of leopard frogs, a few species of snakes, lots of sparrows, and other birds like killdeer and red-winged blackbirds, and some rather large spiders, which are not always the most pleasant thing to be surprised with when you're walking through the fields, but nice to see nonetheless. And in addition to the wildlife, I should probably note that not all of our target species, so the species that were present within our seed mix, were captured with our box plot survey method. And so in addition to a lot of the goldenrods and the black-eyed Susans, we also saw clumps of big bluestem and Virginia wild rye, and a longer list of flowers, including tall coreopsis, pale coneflower, wild bergamot, tall and false sunflower, evening primrose, hairy beard tongue, and a few species of milkweed. Next slide. Great. And so, yeah, looking at next steps, we do still have one more year of work on the meadow, and we'll be continuing with all the previously mentioned monitoring and maintenance activities. So we're still going ahead with spot spraying and chemical control of the parsnip. We'll be mowing as needed just to try to keep the Manitoba maple down because it does spread rapidly. And then the continued monitoring throughout the summer months. And then next slide. And finally here, just before I kind of wrap up my piece, I just wanted to touch on a few lessons learned. And that collaboration was really important and key for us with this project. No one organization had all the answers. And so a lot of the time, it seems like the best results come from allowing many groups to play with their strengths. We can never be too prepared, and so proper planning was really key for the long-term success of the project. We tried to rush the site preparation phase, and that didn't end up working. But by having additional experts and other groups be part of the project, we were able to adjust and find an alternative option that led to better success. And then sometimes you just get unlucky. We had some poor weather, but plants and nature is fairly resilient, so don't panic. It just takes time for things to establish. And then I think that's the last one. So yeah, happy to, I know it was brief, but happy to answer any questions and clarify anything that I may have missed for people.
Great, thanks for that, Brandon. I'm going to encourage everyone to put any questions you have in the Q&A box, and then we'll go through them. Right off the top, Brandon, someone's asking about what seed was used to seed the meadow, what species?
Yeah, so I think one of the slides there had a breakdown.
One of the first ones?
Yeah, one of the earlier ones. I think it was slide 6, the custom seed mix. So there, yeah, roughly 27 species. I don't know if all of them are listed right there, but you can see a breakdown of the grasses and wildflowers present.
And I can add some of the intent around that is that because we want to create a meadow habitat, we do want to put a high mix of forb seeds in there. So grasses are a component, but they're a smaller component. So the research suggests the more variety of species of wildflowers that you can put in, you're going to cover the season, all the different seasons and all the different needs of the variety of pollinators that might show up in that area. And that's why we do it that way. But it also means that it can be quite expensive. So each of those flowers has to be hand collected in some way and processed and packaged and mixed and all these things. So that's why native seed mixes can be very expensive. And so we want to be careful about how we plan to use it and what technique we use to put it into the ground. But the drill seeder has been very effective for getting that seed well placed into the ground. Okay, next question. Did RVCA rent the seed drill or was it provided by one of the partners?
Yeah, so it was rented. I don't have the exact cost, but I know it was fairly expensive and probably prohibitive for a lot of smaller projects. So yeah, again, one of the challenges of working with native seed, a lot of what is currently available is not geared towards it. And it is a bit of a specialty product. And so we need specialty equipment. And so another big barrier that we were lucky enough to overcome. But I can understand how, if you had a smaller scale project with not as many partners, it could be a big challenge.
Yeah, seed drillers are very hard to find, and I believe this particular one was brought up from southwestern Ontario, so it was a bit of a challenge to schedule things and be able to transport it and have the soil conditions be perfect for the drill seeder. If it's too wet, then the drill seeder gets stuck, and you want to have the right time in the season to come and put those seeds into the ground. You need someone with the specialized knowledge of how to run one of these seed drills, how to fix it if something goes wrong. If anyone's not familiar with a seed driller, I believe Victoria's going to put in the chat one of the YouTube videos that came out, and it shows from a drone perspective what it looks like when the seed driller was running over the ground there and putting the seed in. And it makes these very shallow little troughs and drops the seed in, covers it over a little bit with soil, and then moves on. So in some ways you can use less seed, which is a good thing, but then you have to offset the cost of using that heavy equipment. So, okay, next question. How did you prep the ground? For example, did you till it? Did you position? I'm not sure what that word is, position it before seeding?
Yeah, so that was one of the early challenges. The field was originally corn, and so because of that, dense corn stalks were left over, and that was the idea behind disking the field in the first place. So trying to turn up the dirt a little bit and expose the soil from the corn husks. And so that was the original plan. After that, soybeans were planted. I'm not exactly sure what was done between soybeans and the field being planted. I don't know, maybe Tracy, if you have a better recollection of that. But potentially it was tilled, maybe, just depending on what the site required at that time.
Yeah. And so, yeah, we do like to see them have either soybean or corn beforehand. It makes it easier to process it, break it down. There's less issues with weed control going forward. But like you said, you do have to make sure you get that corn stalk broken down small enough, because if it is really dense and heavy, you're not going to get to the soil. And that soil seed contact is super important. Next question. I think this is just an error, Brandon. The question was, I thought a meadow would be 70% forbs and 30% grasses. So I think on your slide, you've just got them reversed, maybe.
Oh, maybe, yeah. Working from an old presentation here, so yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Error there.
Okay. Next question. Where did you source your seed?
Yeah, great question. I know there for the additional seed that happened in the year or two after the original planting, that came from St. William's Nursery, which is in southwestern Ontario. Tracy, I'm not sure where the original seed was sourced from.
I believe it was Ontario Naturescapes, the same company that did the drill seeding. Okay. Were there any agreements with Hydro required prior to planting? For example, safe harbor agreements, rights of way agreements, stewardship plans?
Yeah, maybe Tracy, you can speak to some of that. I know there was in a maintenance, like a long-term maintenance agreement for us to manage and take care of the site for 5 years post implementation. Beyond that, though, I'm not sure.
I don't believe there was any safe harbor agreements or rights of way agreements per se, because this land is owned by Hydro Ottawa. It's their project, it's their site, so it's all under their jurisdiction. So, like you said, just RVCA has the agreement to go and maintain it on their behalf. So that's the extent of the agreements, to my knowledge. Next question. How did you decide when is the right time to mow for maintenance?
Yeah, good question. In the early years, a lot of the mowing was decided around when things were going to seed, just to try and prevent some of those weedy species from getting seedbed established. And the other thing that we were trying to be mindful of were the Manitoba maple seedlings. When they started to come up, we would make sure to get those mowed down as soon as we could. Yeah, those are kind of roughly what we used to decide mowing.
Yeah, typically a code of practice is about knee height. So you want to be able to cut down any of the weeds that grow really super fast, and your natives are still really small. We have a saying, creep, sleep, and leap. So the first year they're just underground, kind of creeping around, trying to get started. The second year they're still underground, but they're starting to put structures up. And then the third year we're expecting to see like the full complement of everything that was seeded. So it kind of takes a lot of on the spot, monitoring and seeing what's coming up and what the best approach would be. But definitely there is required some mowing, at least in the first year and maybe the second or third, depending on what comes up. Next question. Do you have buckthorn blowing in? And if so, are you finding it is being kept down by the forbs and grasses?
Yeah, fortunately, no buckthorn around the meadow. I know there is some on the road heading towards it. So yeah, that's not a challenge we have to deal with for this one. The more problematic species was the parsnip. That's just everywhere surrounding.
Mm-hmm. This part of the world, parsnip is probably the number one weed that we can worrying about. Okay, next question. Can you use a broadcast sprayer to water the plants to get them started in a drought condition?
Yeah, good question. I know during that first year, we did bring in a small truck to water the trees. I don't think, from anything I've seen, that the field itself was watered. And unfortunately, because I wasn't around at that time, I can't really speak to whether or how that decision was made.
Generally speaking, that it's not a practice to water stuff because you're either putting it in the spring where there's going to be some rain expected at some point, or the fall. Those are the two sort of windows where planting often happens. It's really not something you want to do in like July where it's super hot. And these are all native plants, so they're adapted to this climate in this part of the world. So you want them to just to naturally grow under those kind of conditions. Sometimes it's going to be dry, sometimes it's going to be wet, but it's not like a garden project where you'd be watering things to get them established. You really want to have a hands-off approach when it comes to watering. Okay, next question. Hydro One has used oats in lieu of native grasses in some cases. Would you be able to comment on the relative benefits of the benefits and problems with your approach?
Maybe Tracy, you could comment on that. I know we did use clover around the trees just as a way to suppress some of the weeds. But yeah,
I could say that oats has been historically used in some restoration projects. Some of the research that I've seen recently shows that they can be allelopathic, so meaning they can put chemicals in the ground that prevent other native species from developing. So we've sort of been leaning away from that and allowing those native grasses to take over that role, because you don't want to end up in a situation where you're stalling those native plants from getting going. So that's why unless there's like a really, really bad weed situation nearby and you were really worried about it, you might put some oats in it. But generally in this kind of a site, you wouldn't need them. Okay, next question. I'm not sure if you can answer this one, but what is the cup plant? I have a hosta with the same name, so they're wondering if you can tell them the name.
I don't have the Latin.
I think it's Silphinium perfoliatum, so cup plant. Probably Google that one to get the Latin. Okay, next question. John McKinnon. The trail that runs along the site, there is the tree buffer from the meadow, but do you also have a mow buffer along the trail as well? If so, how large of one?
Yeah, in the last couple of years, we have mowed a bit of a buffer between, or like alongside the trail. A few meters, I think. I can't recall the exact depth. Partially, the reason for that is that we were seeing a lot of Manitoba maple and parsnip kind of along the edges. And so just kind of an easy method to keep those from growing up without kind of having to mow a bunch of the meadow down. So that was kind of the reasoning behind that.
Oh, and Nora helped us out with Latin here. So she's confirming Silphium perfoliatum or foliata. So thanks, Nora. Next question. You might have said this, but do you continue mowing at the same times mid-July and early September in subsequent years?
It depends a lot on kind of the need. So instead of having a set schedule that we stick to, it's looking at site conditions and mowing as needed. At this point, we are seeing a lot of our native plants come up, and so probably mowing as often isn't isn't really required. So it's more of you judge it by what's happening on the site rather than sticking to a very specific prescribed plan.
I'm just seeing there's no more questions in the Q&A, but I see a few people have put questions in the chat box. If you can put your question in the QA box, that's very helpful. A thought about adding New England asters as a fall flower for migrating monarchs. Definitely New England aster was in the mix, and it's also quite prevalent in the local area. So it's showing up in the site already. And definitely we had common milkweed in this mix. Generally for our mixes, we try to have about 4% milkweed. Sometimes we'll have different species, whether it be butterfly milkweed or swamp milkweed, to have a couple of different species depending on the site conditions. Okay, let's see any other questions. About irrigation. Yeah, so if you want to learn more, see any videos, or there's a blog post and a podcast, there's been lots of promotion about this project. There's a couple of links in the chat box you can check out. Here's a good one. Will spraying for parsnip adversely affect pollinators that feed on the pollinator plants?
Yeah, good question. I think the idea behind spot spraying is that we can be really careful to target very specific plants instead of kind of spraying more broadly. And so, especially getting the parsnip when everything is still low, kind of getting that new growth. Generally, I think we haven't seen a lot of adverse reactions. Even plants growing up, close by don't seem to be impacted at all by spraying. So. Whether or not there's zero impact, I can't say, but I think kind of we're mindful to do our best to just target the very specific species we're worried about, and to try to keep the spray contained just to that small area.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and use of herbicide is always a question that comes up, and impacts on pollinators. We're definitely just talking about spot spraying individual places. It's not a widespread broadcast by any means, and it's offset by the benefits of opening up that space for other native plants and not having the parsnip take over. Okay, another question. Would you not get better results with a fall spreading of seed?
Yeah, great question. I think the additional seed that was laid after the meadow was established, I actually think that was laid down in the fall. As far as the benefits between fall and spring, I don't know that I would be the best to comment. Maybe Tracy has a better idea.
So definitely, like I say, fall and spring are both really great times. The benefit, obviously, if you put them in the spring, is that you're going to have that winter stratification, and then the next season they're going to bloom and grow. But what was I going to say? The fall fall or spring can be good. It's just you're going to balance off your expectations of when things are going to grow. And this is a natural system, so it's going to behave like it would naturally in a natural system. Okay, and it's also, with the drill seeder, it's a consideration of what the soil conditions are going to be like. So that's kind of a hit and a miss guess too. Okay. Do you stick with common species or rare species included?
Yeah, so the seed mix that we were still playing, I guess, is kind of what was selected. Again, unfortunately, it wasn't around, so I can't say as to the exact reasoning behind each species selection. But I don't know, Tracy, you can speak to that.
Generally, this is about a native mix of what would be typical in this area. This is not a conservation project where we're trying to increase a rare species. We're trying to use local natives that would be found in this area. So it's not about including rares. Next question. Will you do any prescribed burning or stick with the mowing?
Yeah, so there was no, in the original plans, there was no prescribed burning included. And so as of right now, I think that's probably not part of the plans moving forward. So we'll see what the site needs as the years go by.
I mean, prescribed burns are a great way to maintain a meadow site, but when you're working under a electrical facility, that's a big no-go. You can't have fire or sparking or arcing under a power line. So you have to look to other maintenance methods for sure. I guess this is more of a comment. I'm assuming the seeds that were purchased had already been stratified. I don't know if they were in this case. A lot of times the seeds might have just been collected in the field the season before in the fall. So it's not necessarily that they've been stratified. That would be something that you have to discuss with your seed vendor about whether it's been stratified. And most of the vendors that I've spoken to, there's such a high demand, they don't have a lot of turnover. They don't have a lot of seed just sitting in storage necessarily. It's, it's collected and then it's used up for projects in the year following. So like native seed in the province, and even Canada's broadly, is really hard to get. So it's the kind of thing, if you're planning a project like this, you have to start talking to people early and find out what seeds you can get and get them secured so that your project can be completed. Next question, is wild parsnip what I know as wild carrot or Queen Anne's lace, and why is it a problem?
Two different plants. Wild parsnip is the big, tall, yellow one. You see it everywhere along the sides of roads in the springtime. The problem is that if the sap gets on your skin, it can cause burns when exposed to the sun. And so just because of that, we consider it a hazard plant. And so best to try and keep it out of any spaces where people might be or where it potentially has a hazard to the public.
Yeah, for sure. It looks like that's it for questions. If anyone has anything burning they want to ask Brandon, please throw it in the Q&A. Let's see if there's anything else that I missed. I think that's it. So maybe one more popped up here. Not familiar with Sullivan's milkweed. Where is it available? So this would have come from Ontario Nativescape from their collection sites. So yeah, it's not a terribly common milkweed species, but it does like this kind of soil type. So a small amount was included in this seed mix. I don't know if you had anything to add to that, Brandon.
No, it covers it, yeah.
Yeah, okay. All right, well, I think that we're at the end of questions there, just before the top of the hour. So again, I want to thank Brandon for joining us and talking about the project and helping us put forth more knowledge and techniques about all these pollinator projects and how they're done. So thanks, Brandon.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, have a good day, everybody.